of thing, or learn new skills in terms of this as well. So our staff will know that there are a lot of terms and there are a lot of ways to say behaviour management or dealing with behaviour or whatever it's called. So we're going to chat through those terms tonight just to make sure everyone's comfortable with them. We're going to look in a lot more detail about emotion coaching, which is the biggest aspect of tonight, is to introduce that theme and that topic to you. We're going to look at different support strategies. We're going to look at regulation, some insights into theory that we use in early years and why we feel it's beneficial, as well as current research, some practical examples that you guys can use at home and staff can use in the setting, and then some further reading as well, because I always like to throw that in at the end in case there's anything that you want to look into in any more detail. So let's think about the specific terms. The first term we're going to look at is the word behaviour. When we are talking about behaviour in early years and when we're talking about it in nursery, we don't very often tend to say behaviour management anymore or bad behaviour, just because we understand very much that behaviour is a communication and all behaviour that we see from children is a communication. However, in the parenting world of things, we know that that's very, very different, and that might not be the way you guys see it at all. So something that we really want to push for you tonight and really encourage you to reflect and think about is that every behaviour that we see from a child and adults, but let's be specific to children tonight, is a communication. Children are always trying to tell us something. However, they lack that maturity and those developmental skills to stop, listen to their body, and then effectively verbalise what they need to say. So that goes for all children of all the ages that we're talking about tonight, all the way through to sort of 5, 6, 7, because they don't have all those skills. We need to really think about the fact that they're trying to communicate with us. And if you can adopt that way of thinking, it's a really good opportunity to open up opportunities for you to empathise, to sympathise with your child, and then you're much more likely to react to their behaviour with an air of curiosity, wondering what's happening, what they're trying to tell you, and to reflect around what they're trying to say, as opposed to that emotional reaction and that purely reacting emotionally to the behaviour and what they're doing rather than what they're trying to say. When we talk about emotion coaching, which is what I said a big part of tonight, is emotion coaching is simply our ability to teach emotional intelligence to children. So with us as adults being able to understand emotions, being able to recognise those low-level emotions in our children and then support them through that, that's what we're talking about in terms of emotion coaching. Effective intervention is a very, very similar term. It's a professional term in early years, which just means how to intervene effectively. So how to step into a situation and to support it with success. But you don't need to allow any of these terms to confuse you or to take away from the message of this evening. If there's a term that's used that isn't clear to you, please stop me straight away and ask for clarification. However, the overarching aim tonight is to talk about how we support children's behaviours. And so that's generally what all of the terms mean. Anyway, they all tend to mean the same thing. Regulation is another big term, and self-regulation are two big terms that come up a lot for us in early years. They underpin a lot of our curriculum and the regulations that we use, which is really helpful because it means that the world of early years is moving on and research is being listened to. And so regulation is something that is really important for us to understand as professionals and really, really supportive for you guys to understand as adults as well. So when we think about the word regulation, it is the action or process of regulating or being regulated. And when we think about self-regulation, that's the fact of something such as an organisation regulating itself, but without intervention from external bodies. So when we think about that, for example, in human terms, for an adult to be regulated, that might be remaining calm when another driver might have made a decision that you don't agree with. So while you're driving, instead of having that huge road rage, for you to be regulated might mean that actually you can take a deep breath, you can politely confront them as they enter a queue in front of you in the supermarket, or if your brother drops the salad at the barbecue after you suggested that you could help him, and he said no, he was absolutely fine, you can just take that deep breath and think, okay, what's the helpful thing to do moving forward? What's actually important here? What's the point here? So yeah, the point is to be able to remain in that state of self-control even when things might be heightened and not necessarily going your way or a little bit stressful. And I think hopefully, given the examples that I've just given, you would agree as an adult that's not always easy. To be regulated as an adult is not the easiest thing. We have a lot of things going on. However, from a child's perspective, it's exactly the same, if not worse, because they don't have that developmental ability to go, oh, this is a stressful situation, this is difficult, and this is tricky. I need to take a deep breath. I need to step back. I need to think about what's going on. And obviously they don't have all of those language and communication abilities yet. So that's where emotion coaching comes in, because we teach those skills and we talk about those skills. When we look specifically, like I said, at the regulations and the legal documents that we use, I've taken a quote from the Development Matters, which is one of the guidance that we use as the EYFS and as our curriculum that we use at Little Hands and in all nurseries. And in short, what they are saying is that self-regulation is very, very important. However, what they don't mention is that self-regulation is only possible after co-regulation. So to suggest that a child is able to self-regulate on their own without any intervention, without any input, if we look at that definition that we looked at before, is a very difficult thing to say. And so I think what we need to keep in our mind is that self-regulation is the end goal. That's absolutely where we want our children to get to. That's what we want them to be able to do. We want them to be able to have those skills to stop and think, okay, I'm finding this tricky. What do I need to do? But actually, in order to do that, we need to co-regulate. So we need to partner with our children and we need to work on that with them. We need to show them the skills. We need to role model that with them, and we need to support them through that time and time again so that their brains can make those connections really securely, and then they will be able to go off and do that. And I always say to the staff when I deliver this training, you will be able to think of times when your child can self-regulate, whether that's a baby who's able to put their dummy in on their own when they're crying because it's fallen out, or whether that's a toddler who's able to come up to you and go, "Mommy, my brother or sister just took that from me, I need your help," instead of, you know, hitting their brother or sister or throwing something across the room or whatever might be happening. There are definitely times when you see that, which is absolutely fab. And that's because either you're already role modeling that for them, or the staff team here at Little Hands are role modeling that for them. And so you can already see those skills building, which is fab. But we just definitely won't see that all the time. We won't see that 100% of the time. So yeah, we just need to keep our expectations in check and think about that. When we look at the early learning goals, so when we use the EYFS takes children up to the end of reception. So the curriculum and the framework that we use at nursery, reception classes are also using. So if you've got children of that age group, the early learning goals, which are the ELGs on the screen here, those are what children should be able to do at the end of the EYFS, so at the end of reception. So if I give you an example of what it talks about here, children should be able to do by the end of reception, in terms of self-regulation, so managing themselves, it says that they should be able to show an understanding of their own feelings, those of others, and begin to regulate their behaviour accordingly. So I feel like that really helps us to have a good expectation. Actually, at the end of reception, children should be able to have an awareness of, have an understanding of, and to begin to regulate their behaviour. So when we're thinking about 1, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, they definitely aren't there yet. They definitely aren't doing that yet. So hopefully that helps us to have those expectations where they are not too high. And obviously, if you've got children with additional needs, those expectations are then lower for them, especially if they've got communication difficulties as well. So I will send all of the slides out to you as well, so you can look at these in more detail. But yeah, if we use those as a guide, that helps us put our expectations where they need to be. So when we think specifically about emotion coaching, John Gottman is the man who kind of coined the phrase, did a lot of the research and brought a lot of this to light in the 90s. It's not exactly new information, unfortunately, but it just doesn't seem to have been spread far and wide enough. So it's something that we definitely rave and shout about as much as we can. So John Gottman talked about the 4 types of parenting styles, or styles to support children. So you may have heard some of these, and I've got some of my own personal examples that I feel linked to all of these, because there's not necessarily one type that you're going to fit into. And whilst I may describe one type and you might think that's absolutely not me, we all get pushed to our limits sometimes, don't we? So when we think about dismissive parenting, that looks at parents who feel like emotions maybe don't really exist for children. We don't understand them in ourselves very much. We don't really understand them in children. We don't really want them to feel any negative or overwhelming emotions. That's not to say that these kind of parents are not supportive, are not loving. You can very much still be warm and loving, and you can sort of say, "What's the matter? Oh, don't be sad. don't cry, let's see you smile, come on, there we go, that's lovely and happy. But what that message is sending is that we're not allowing children to process their emotions. To me, I relate this very much to like a grandparent view. I feel like dismissive emotions are very much like what grandparents are. Grandparents never want them to be sad, they never want them to be upset. My specific example of this is, it was my birthday a couple of years ago, and it happened to be on the same day that my son was going to come out of pull-ups at bedtime. He'd been dry for ages. We'd been talking about it for a while, and we were like, do you know what? Tonight's the night. You can do this. You've got this. No more pull-ups for bedtime. And he was upset about it, and his anxiety built, and he got a bit more upset about it. And my mother-in-law was like, oh, I'm so sorry he's crying on your birthday. And I was like, I get it. I get why you don't want him to cry on my birthday. But from my perspective, luckily knowing all of this information, his life is also moving at the same time as mine. He's not going to not be upset because it's my birthday. He's upset because he's got this going on. He's worried about it. He'll be really proud of himself tomorrow when he's not wet. And he wasn't, and he was really proud of himself, and we moved on from there. But yes, I think that's my example. I think it's very grandparenty style of parenting. Then we move on to the disapproving style. Disapproving is where people tend to think that emotions get in the way. Emotions are very inconvenient, and emotions cause the behaviours that we don't want to accept. Therefore, the emotions got to stop. And I know I can think of lots of examples. When I was growing up, my parents weren't very emotionally intelligent, and so it was easier to just sort of block those out and sort of disapprove of those. An example I can always think of for this is you're solo parenting for the evening. You've put your children to bed 3 times. They keep getting out of bed. Now they're telling you that they're scared, but you as a parent are tired. You've had enough. You are ready for bed. You're not even ready to go to bed because you've got to unload the dishwasher and you've got 3 other things to do. And so you snap, and there's nothing to be scared of. Go back to bed. Don't get out again, or there's going to be serious consequences. I feel like we've probably all been there. I know I've definitely been there. I can definitely relate to that. I know that at 5 o'clock I'm exhausted, let alone at 8 o'clock when we actually get to bedtime. However, me threatening consequences to stop my child being scared or to stop getting out of bed isn't going to take away their fear, whether it's rational or otherwise. It isn't going to take that away. It's not going to stop them feeling that way. And John Gottman suggests that we are just sending a message to children that actually you don't need to trust or listen to your emotions. You know, Mummy's telling you otherwise. Mummy's telling you to not feel that way and go back to bed. So actually, well, should I trust myself then? I'm feeling this way. Is that wrong then? And instead, when we think about emotion coaching, we can guide children through that using our empathy and our experiences. And like I said earlier, if you're looking at every behaviour as a communication, they're trying to tell me something, what do they need or what are they trying to tell me? Then hopefully we can reduce the frequency that we lose patience with our children with those situations because we're looking at them slightly differently. So, for example, an appropriate response to that specific situation might be that it can be scary at night time when it's quiet, when it's dark and you're on your own. That makes sense. And then emotion coaching suggests that you would problem solve together. So you love cuddling your teddy at night time and keeping each other safe. Have you got your teddy? You also have your night light. Let's check that that's on and it's shining in your bedroom. You can use your personal experiences to reinforce that everybody does get scared and that you can work through that logically in this specific instance. So when I get scared, I like to sing my favourite song or give my teddy a cuddle and help them to understand, hopefully this is a less scary experience because mommy feels that way sometimes too, or daddy feels that way too. Perhaps use other life experiences that children have got. So storybooks are an absolutely fab. Oh, yes, lovely. Oh, absolutely. Yes, agreed in terms of bedtime. Absolutely agreed. Because pushing bedtime a little bit longer is always a great idea, isn't it? But I will come on to, when we talk a little bit more about emotion coaching specifically, there is still a limit and there is still a boundary, and you are absolutely still within your right to reinforce that. You need to, otherwise there'd be absolute chaos. So yeah, there is also a stage where you've got to, yeah, we've checked all of these things. It is bedtime. I am going to leave you now. I don't want you to get out of bed. I'll come and check on you in 2 minutes. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But also using other life experiences. So storybooks are like amazing. There are so many incredible storybooks out there that talk about emotions, that talk about dealing with these things and moving through these things. I saw at least 5 while I was walking through our Stourbridge branch earlier. And you can, if you want to, absolutely ask the staff team at your nursery Have you got any books around either emotions in general, because they have, or whether it's a specific thing? Is it struggling with bedtime? Is it struggling with this specific thing? Chances are Nurseries got it, and you're absolutely welcome to borrow it. But there are hundreds of storybooks out there which are really helpful. And then another really simple and quick one is TV shows that the children like to watch, or films that they like to watch. Chances are that scenario's come up. Meg's just mouthed it to me. It's exactly what I got written down. Bluey, love it or hate it, Bluey is a fantastic resource for this kind of thing, because chances are they've been through it. There's the episode where they go to the cinema and Bluey is worried about the thunderstorm. Bluey's a little bit anxious, a little bit scared of the fact that they're going to be too young for it, or it's going to be worrying. And they help to move through that, and they think about that. There's another one. There's a storybook that my son's read with a hippo in. I can't remember the title of the book now. And he's like, hippo says never give up. And he references that. And so we use that. We use that to our advantage and things like that. And that helps it to feel less abstract to children, doesn't it? The same for us. If we get to meet people with life experiences that are similar to ours, that helps it feel validated and that kind of thing. So use that as well, because that can be really helpful. The third parenting style that John Gottman talks about is laissez-faire, which you may or may not heard of. If you're professionally in the field, you've probably heard of it because it usually comes up on our level 3. It's a French phrase, and it literally translates to allows to do. So laissez-faire is where all emotions are allowed. They're all welcome. All behaviour is allowed. It's all welcome. But what is missing from that stage is the guidance part of the process. The crucial part of the limits, the boundaries, the guidance is unfortunately missing there. Laissez-faire is what gives emotion coaching a bad name. So emotion coaching, whether you call it gentle parenting, therapeutic parenting, all of those things get a bad name because people think that people are being laissez-faire. They think, oh, there's no boundaries with their children, or, oh, they do it that way and they just let them get on with anything, and they're absolutely feral, or whatever that might be, which is such a shame. And I feel like for us guys who know what emotion coaching looks like and how it works in practice, we really have to defend it. And it's such a shame, isn't it? Because it's not that. Laissez-faire can really cause a lot of overwhelm for children, because they feel their emotions and they sort of don't have any limits on that, and that's great. But because they don't have that guidance to process and work through those emotions and manage them appropriately, let's say a child gets excited and that excitement builds and builds and builds. There's no guidance or skill to bring that back down to a reasonable level. So they're getting overwhelmed in lots of different ways. Whereas when we look at emotion coaching, that's generally where adults are very skilled at recognising lower intensity emotions in our children. So knowing when to step in with guidance and support before it builds to an unmanageable level. So things that it's very simple things that this links to, as well as more advanced things. So it might look like having a predictable and a regular routine, which you guys have probably got at home, and you've got a nursery as well. And that is very skeleton. That is in terms of, I wake up every day and I get dressed. I wake up every day and I have breakfast. I wake up every day and I go to nursery and I have lunch, and then I go home, or whatever that might be. It's not got to be down to the specific half an hour, but children know what to expect. They know what's coming next, and then that can generally help them feel that greater sense of calm and ease. If you've got anxious children, that's usually something that puts them off, isn't it? If the routine is out of whack. It might be that you're at a birthday party and you've noticed that your child is getting overwhelmingly excited with all of this new soft play equipment, with so many children to play with, and they're all naturally playing very differently in different ways. They're getting excited. A good opportunity there is for us to step in, gently guide them to a successful outcome before they become completely overwhelmed and behave unacceptably or become distressed. So ways that we might do that is role modelling. So, for example, we might role model how we're going to approach children. So, my name is so-and-so, what's your name? Shall we play? Again, ensuring that this is integrated into your daily routine is really, really helpful. So something that we talk about with staff a lot is when your child is dysregulated or is becoming dysregulated or is struggling, that's not usually the time to teach a lesson. That's not usually the time to implement. Let's do some deep breaths, because actually they're really dysregulated and it's not going to happen. So if you can think about integrating these into your daily routine, integrating them into your normal family life when you're not dysregulated, then you're much more likely to be able to adopt that idea when you do. So for example, when you're at soft play on a Saturday at a birthday party, that's not the kind of time to be teaching these new skills and thinking about those things. We've all been to soft play on a Saturday, I think, and oh my goodness. But if you're at a quiet park on a Sunday morning, then you can practice these skills. So emotion coaching is being much more intentional about, okay, last week they were really overwhelmed and really struggled with X, Y, and Z. Let's practice the kind of skills and the guidance that we need for that when they're not in that state, so that hopefully next time I will either be able to support them through that before they get into that state, or if they do get into that state, I might be able to bring them out of it a little bit more quickly or a little bit more effectively. So you can think about that. Even if there's not other children around, we as adults, we can pretend to be the children and we can put that role modeling in place. So actually we might say, I'd like to have a turn on the slide before you, please. Can I please have a turn first? And then you can use the kind of phrases that children would then use to protect their own boundaries. Or, you know, I don't like being spoken to like that. I like it when you speak to me nicely. Or, you know, you're really role modeling all of those things that they're not necessarily getting. If your child is struggling with drop off at nursery, that might look like you chatting to them and saying, you're struggling with this. Your key worker is here to keep you safe. I'm going to make sure you've got X, Y, and Z, your dummy, your bag, whatever it is that makes you feel safe and helps you to feel comfortable. And I'll be back at such and such time. And so it's obviously very different for a lot of children in terms of how they settle at nursery and how that goes. But the boundary is ultimately still there. You are being dropped off at nursery and you are staying at nursery. However, we've got all of these things in place. Nursery have got, you know, a long list of other things that they can also include on top of that to help children settle and things going on. But ultimately, this is what's happening and that is the limit. And I think that is the big difference with emotion coaching, is the limit and the boundary is still there. But it's just approaching it in a different way. It's approaching it in a way that supports your emotions instead of coming across as a consequence, which is something we'll talk about in a minute as well. Let Lauren know if you've got any questions on that. If you have looked at our behaviour policy at Little Hands, it is called Promoting Positive Behaviour because, as you can imagine from that title, we're very much more about what children can do, what they're good at, their freedom, their independence, and making sure that fits within the boundaries of acceptable behaviour, and giving them those opportunities to make good choices. So there is a huge focus on that at Little Hands, and giving children the skills that they need to be able to do this. However, the policy is also designed to give lots of help and support when children are struggling with those things, or when you as the adult sort of are struggling and don't necessarily know where to go next. So if you would ever like a copy of the policy, you're very welcome to have that emailed to you or printed out to you. Try and save the trees, but yeah, it is what it is. So yeah, there's lots of things in there. There's lots of words that you'll read in there where we talk about respect, boundaries, safety. We talk about words like encourage, praise, responsibility. There are always lots of opportunities there for us to role model, to give lots of support, to give confidence, to build that self-esteem. A child is much more likely to have self-esteem and have more confidence if they hear you saying what they do well and when they do manage things well, rather than always focusing on what they haven't done well. And I think there's a popular post that talks about the brain can't comprehend the negative. So if I tell you to not think about an elephant, chances are you just pictured an elephant in your head. And it's very similar with children at Little Hands. We try not to ask them. So instead of saying, don't run inside, because all that does is tell the child what you don't want them to do. It doesn't give them any instruction. They just kind of stand there and like, well, okay. What we try to do is focus on the positive and what we do want to happen. So we use walking feet inside. Great, you've solved the problem, but actually what you've done is you've also kept your relationship nice and strong. You've kept that connection and that bond together, but you were very clear about what you wanted to happen. We use walking feet inside, and it's very similar with things like behaviour as well. So actually, a child's been really overwhelmed and they've just thrown something across the room. Instead of saying, we don't throw that, or that's not for throwing, instead, what we might say is, you can throw this outside, or you can throw a ball, not a remote. So we still set the limit and we still set the boundary. Oh, that's Teresa finished upstairs. But we can focus on what they can do and what they are able to do. And again, that just keeps reinforcing what children are allowed to do, what they can do. You can do loads of things and you are able to do this by yourself. Things like when we think about independence, that can lead to a lot of overwhelm and a lot of behavioural difficulties, can't it? Of, I want to do that by myself. And so it's thinking about, again, it's pre-planning in your head. What can they do? Like giving choices that you can support right now. Like if it's 5 to 8 and you need to be out of the door 10 minutes ago, you're unlikely to be able to say, would you like to put all of your shoes on by yourself this morning? Because actually that's not realistic. And then you're going to be overwhelmed and rushing and all that kind of thing. It's thinking about actually what options can I give you? what opportunities can I give you that fit in with what we are doing right now? And maybe it's something as simple as, you need to carry my keys. Can you carry my keys for me this morning while I put your shoes on, or whatever that might be. When we think about praise with children, that usually refers to recognising and noticing closely for your child. So another piece of research that's really interesting is that praise for the sake of praise, or very superficial praise, could be considered to promote external validation for children. So, for example, if we're regularly saying good boy, good girl, that picture that you've made is really beautiful, your dress is really pretty, or you've done exactly as I've asked. Whilst those comments are all very common comments that we get and that we make and that children hear, none of those things necessarily promote the values that we want to see in our children, that we want children to be doing. So if we think about lots of examples of what we would want, we talk about professionally, we talk about process over product. So we talk about, rather than thinking at the picture that they've created at the end of it, again, that links to another Bluey episode, doesn't it? Mom says that the picture is perfect on the fridge and Bluey won't stop trying to make it perfect, and Mom doesn't even remember that she said that. Whereas actually what we think about when we think about process over product, or we think about purposeful praise, we think about, it's not about the end result, it's not about the picture, it's about the work or the enjoyment that went into it. So we think about, you worked really hard on that. I can see all those beautiful colours that you've used there, and that range of colours that you've used, or I can see where you've used your pencil and you've made some circles and you've made this over. Tell me more about this. And it's thinking about actually, what skills do we want them to have? What do we really want them to enjoy? When we're thinking about behaviour specifically, we want to hear lots of things like, that was really patient of you while you waited for that toy. You shared that with your sister and that was fantastic. You came to me for help when you were cross or when you were struggling to share then. I hope you're really proud of yourself, because those are the kind of things we want you to be doing. It looks like you worked so hard on that. I can see so many different things there. You seem really proud of that. Do you want to tell me more about it? Your friend was really struggling then and you helped them. What a supportive thing to do. And thank you for listening to other people's opinions when you're sat and you're reading a story together or doing those things. And it's thinking about things like that so that children hear loads of positive things about themselves, but it's not about what they've produced. It's more about how they've done things or how they've moved throughout their day. I've linked, when I send this out to you, I'll send it out via PDF, because I've linked here a blog post that we did which talks about those kind of compliments and that kind of praise in a little bit more detail. But ultimately, it doesn't, it doesn't focus on needing that external validation. It focuses on the kind of values that we want them to practice. And it's really nice to focus on what's special about themselves. Like, you may have come across, we definitely have working in early years, but you will have come across the child who kind of gets labelled, or everybody knows that child's name and it's not necessarily for the right reason. And what I think is fantastic at Little Hands, especially since we adopted emotion coaching, is that doesn't really happen anymore, because you don't constantly hear that conversation of, oh, so-and-so stop throwing, oh, so-and-so stop doing that. You don't, and then the children start to naturally pick up on that of, oh, so-and-so throws or so-and-so does that. And it's the same at home. If you repeat it enough that they're not doing something, or they're not doing something you want them to do, or they don't do something well, they're going to believe that about themselves. Whereas I feel like what we do really well is to reinforce, your friends like it when you do this instead. Your friends really like it when you do this instead. And so we don't really get that anymore. It doesn't happen. And I feel like that's really nice, and a really good opportunity to think about how we can build self-confidence and self-awareness in children, rather than them always focusing on what they don't do well. Actually, they know what they do well. They know what is appreciated and what values work really well. So it's a huge skill. It takes a lot of practice, but it is really, really rewarding to hear a child say, I'm really proud of myself for practicing that, or something like that, which is really cute and very, very rewarding and makes it definitely worth it. And it also limits the likelihood that children will behave a certain way just for that praise or reward. So I'm not saying that sticker charts and things like that are never a good idea, because that's absolutely not the case, but you may find that kind of repetitive behaviour, I'm doing it for a sticker, I'm not necessarily doing it because I feel like it's a good and valuable skill to have. When we think about regulation and emotion coaching, then from a parent point of view, it's got to start at the bottom of this triangle. And again, I've linked where all of these have come from at the end for you, so you can look at them in more detail if you want to. But yeah, it's got to start with you. It's got to start with your self-regulation and honestly thinking about where you struggle to regulate. Like, this was when I learned about this at work, it was a real process of, oh my goodness, I'm not very emotionally intelligent and I really need to work on my triggers. And like, when you're thinking about it at work, what triggers you? Is it really busy lunchtime, you've got 14 toddlers around the table and actually one staff member's on the lunch and you've got a lot going on, and then somebody spills something and it's all going on and it's all getting a bit much? If you can recognize that about yourself, that's a great start. From a parent point of view, is it when you're asked 4,000 questions in a 30-second period? Is that a bit much? Is that a bit intense for you? And actually, does that usually cause you to flip your lid and sort of go over the edge? How can you sort of work on that? How can you, put yourself in a position where you can deal with those things? Because you can't deal with those situations if you aren't regulated and if you can't sort of recognize that that's bubbling inside you and that's happening. And so a lot of the work to start with is you setting yourself goals and you observing yourself and recognizing that in yourself and thinking about, okay, where do I need to improve on that? I said to my kids the other night, something happened in public and my son said, why don't you just hit him? And I was like, well, because, we don't hit people. That's not an effective way to communicate with people. And I was like, no one ever hits you. And he was like, no, but sometimes you do shout at me and I don't like that. And I was like, I'm really glad that you can tell me that. And that's absolutely right. That's not necessarily an effective way of communicating either. And mommy always reflects on that and doesn't ever want to shout at you. But, we're not aiming for perfection. I'll say that again in a little while, but we're not aiming for perfection with that. That's definitely for sure. But yeah, the more you're aware of your own self-regulation, the better a role model you can be to your child. And then obviously you're doing that a lot anyway. You're taking those deep breaths and thinking about those things. But yeah, the more you can think about your own regulation, you can then move on to that co-regulation with your child. Keep building those skills together, and you will obviously eventually get to lots of self-regulation of your child, and then you not needing to step in quite as often as you need to. Hayley Fuller, I've linked a quote for her at the bottom of this slide. I'm pretty sure she created this graphic as well. I think this was through her Instagram, but she's also on LinkedIn and probably lots of other places as well. But yeah, she's linked at the end because she's absolutely fab. And from a parenting point of view, she's very specific to parenting, which is really nice, but it's very easy to link between things. So what does this look like in reality? What do we see? We see calmer, happier children. They've got a lot better problem solving abilities. So because you've worked through that emotion coaching with them and you've very often problem solved together, this looks really tricky. How can we work this out? How can we work through this problem? Children do have a lot of improved and increased problem solving abilities, which is really, really nice. And we do see it at Little Hands, even with our 0 to 2s, which is the cutest thing in the world, which is really, really lovely. We'll notice that when children have become heightened, we've got that bank of ideas already. So like I said, you need to try and integrate some of these things into your daily practice, into your daily life. And that might be doing deep breaths. That might be a safe person cuddle if your child's particularly cuddly, or that works really well for you guys. It might be an environment change. Like at nursery, very often we'll think, right, we'll get out in the garden, we need some fresh air. Or at Stourbridge, they've got the sensory room. Right, let's get upstairs, let's get in the sensory room, let's just think about that. My mum always used to say to me, water. Give them a drink, put them in the bath, or give them some water to play with. That's a great way to actually give them an opportunity to feel a sensory experience, change how they're feeling or change what's going on, and have a little bit of fun together. But again, if one of your big triggers is things getting messy or things getting really out of control, think about how you're going to manage that. Don't put a massive bucket in the middle of your carpet and then sort of, dysregulate yourself, because obviously that's not helpful for you. Going out for a walk, talking about something that they like. Some children are so chatty and they just really want that input, don't they? The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is really interesting, and it's something that I first saw here at Amblecote in their preschool quite a few years ago now. But Nikki used to have her hand like this with preschool, and they used to do 5 big deep breaths on their hand. Meg knows, nice. I'm not making it up. And you would start at the bottom of your thumb. Move on to my hand. You'd start at the bottom of your thumb and you do a big deep breath in and move to the top, big deep breath out, move down, up, down, and just making children more aware of their bodies, practicing that. We would do that in circle time. You guys could be doing that while you stopped at a red light, whatever that might be. And then, like I said, if you're integrating something like that, something that feels natural to you, because it's got to feel, doable to you as a parent, something that feels right for you, if you're integrating that on a daily basis, then more likely to be able to use that. Sometimes it's something really simple, putting your hands on your chest and feeling your heartbeat, just having that awareness of your body helps you to be a bit more centered and to think about that. Pushing against a wall. So when you think about a child's vestibular system, sometimes they need that physical feedback in their system. So like we've had children in the past who would hit other children or would throw things, and that's because they like to feel that input in their body. And so that's why we talk about, you might not be able to throw this inside, but let's go outside and throw this instead. Or you can throw this, or here's a beanbag, you can throw it up against the wall, because that's how you can do it safely. And actually they just need to feel that physical movement. We had a child who, we used to have the plastic little Tykes cars in the garden, and he used to love crashing that into the wall, not too dramatically, but he used to really love the feedback and the sensory feedback that gave his body. And so your children, use the things that they enjoy and the things that they like, and maybe the things that turn you grey, try and turn those into something that they can do safely and they can do well, to give them that feedback that they need. My son absolutely loves digging, so he's got like a child-sized metal shovel, and he really loves and I do wonder sometimes if it's that feedback of throwing that into the dirt and feeling like he's done that and that kind of thing, whereas that would never work with my daughter. But so thinking about things like that and how you can trust them to do those things safely. Children love a bit of risky play. They love an opportunity to do something that scares us beyond belief, and so it's about thinking how you can facilitate that and how you can do that effectively and safely to keep you sane, but to let them have that opportunity as well. And if with consistency is really important. Like I said earlier, perfect is not what we're aiming for, because we're all only human. So from a staff point of view and a parent point of view, you're not going to be perfect, but consistency is really, really helpful. So if they're consistently getting that response from you, that role modeling, then like I said earlier, those neural pathways really will begin to retrain. They really will. Their brain, connections will relink in a healthier way to deal with their with their emotions, and to sort of show that through their through their behaviour. And then with time, those reactions will happen without that support from you, which is that self-regulation, and which is really, really helpful. Something else that we think about from a staff perspective, which can be really, really helpful from a parenting point of view as well, is to know when to step in, when you are going to be helpful, and when you are probably wasting your breath. In early years, we talk about flipping the lid, and it is literally, Meg, I love it. See, I'm not making this up, guys. And we look at the child's brain as the fist, and we look at the brainstem being down here, and we look at all the different areas of the brain, and we talk very much about when a child is struggling, they've literally flipped the lid on their brain. They have gone from the outside of their brain, which is very logical and very reasoning, they've gone right inside to that very reptilian, mammalian side of their brain, the sort of caveman area of their brain. And actually they're in sort of fight, flight or freeze. They're in that emergency response mode. And every time a child and someone else is struggling to share, or every time they're not getting your attention because you're on the phone, that's sort of where they head to. That's where you get those tantrums or that really difficult, struggling behaviour. And so you probably already know this. You don't need me to tell you this. They're not really listening to you, and they can't really take on board what you're saying when they're in that phase. So actually it's thinking about, how can I bring them out of that? Me lecturing or me standing here and saying you need to stop that, or actually this isn't acceptable, it's really hard, isn't it? Because you want it to be logical and you want it to be reasonable, especially when you're in the middle of the supermarket or wherever you are. But actually it's thinking about, how can we bring them back into that reasoning side of their brain? So we talk about 3 areas of the brain. You've got that reptilian side, the mammalian side, where you're very, the reptilian side where you're very caveman, fight, flight or freeze. Then you've got the layer around that, which we call very much the emotional and attachment side of the brain. And if we think about bringing children out into that side, they need that emotional attachment from you. So this is again where we think about emotion coaching, and we think about not looking at the behavior, but looking at the communication of that child. What are they trying to tell me? What do they need from me right now? Don't try and solve the problem, but actually, I can be here for you. Like we've talked about earlier, does your child like a cuddle? Have they got a dummy? Have they got a favourite teddy? Let's just sit, be together. I mean, I've literally sat in the middle of the woods before with my son because he needed me right now, and actually me telling him we needed to keep walking was not working. So we sat, and we just sat for a minute, and we put our arms around each other, and then I could kind of see him, you know, he still wasn't happy about it, but you could see him coming a little bit more into it. And the quicker you can get them into that, or the more securely you can get them into that emotional side of their brain, the more likely they are then to come out into that logical side of their brain, that outer side of their brain, and be able to start listening to what you're actually saying and to be taking on board what you're saying. And something else that I also say to staff is they're not necessarily going to get there all in one go. So you may have sat on the floor with them in the woods, and you may have been able to calm them enough that actually they're accepting your presence, and they're accepting you being, you know, within their eye line without being completely offended by that. And that might be as far as you get. Okay, we're going to go back to the car now. And then actually when they've had 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or when they're in the car and they feel like they've got that distance from you, maybe then you can revisit that. Maybe then you can have a conversation and sort of say, you know, I noticed that you found it really tricky earlier when X, Y, or Z was happening. Thank you for letting me help you and doing some deep breaths with me, or cuddling me, or whatever that might have been. It helps me a lot when I find things tricky to do that. Next time, maybe we could try those deep breaths before our feelings get so big, or before we find things so tricky. And you're also teaching a really important skill to your children there about reflection and about looking back on what happened. You're doing that very much without judgment. But actually, this is what happened. That's how it seemed to me like it felt for you. That was really tricky for you. You're not putting that pressure on them or that extra blame, but actually you're then talking about plan. You're using that teamwork, you're keeping your connection strong together. And like we said, you're rewiring things so that hopefully next time it doesn't get that far, or 5 times down the line, it doesn't get that far, because you've talked about those things. And you'll also notice with this that children are able to guide others better. Like if their peers are struggling at school or at nursery, you know, so-and-so's crying, they need help, because actually they're used to that reinforcement of actually when I'm struggling, I get help and I get given strategies and ideas. And so they can do that for others as well, which is really cute and really, really lovely. And that helps with their overall empathy and awareness for their peers. And I know that you'll agree every emotion is important for us in our adult lives. So it's definitely the same for children. And we need to break the cycle of the fact that every emotion isn't acceptable just because we find it difficult to deal with, and give children that safe environment to be able to explore that. Otherwise, there's just a higher chance of overwhelm and fear, and all these things keep coming up and us having to keep dealing with those. We offer lots of parent workshops, obviously, to try and support with these things. We train our staff in this a lot. I do our new employee training, and so we spend at least 45 minutes talking about this kind of thing every time we have a new member of staff. Meg knows these things because Meg rejoined our team after having her lovely girls recently. So Meg's done that training with me again. And we have a lot of staff members and a lot of professionals say to us, you know, like, this is mind-blowing, I've never heard of it before. And like I said earlier, this is something that was talked about in the 90s. It's not new. But unfortunately, I think sometimes we get in a bit of a habit, don't we? Like, I know I instinctively still try to parent my kids very much how I was parented and how I just remember my parents doing it, because it's almost like just a physical automatic response. Even though I know all of this stuff, and even though I've practiced all this stuff and seen how effective it can be, it is really, really a conscious effort and a conscious decision to go, oh, okay, that's not making me feel good either, so it's probably not making them feel good. How can we change this? How can we do this? And so thinking about that is really, really hard but helpful. That links quite nicely to limits versus consequences. So I know when I think about how I was brought up and how a lot of children are still brought up now, it's very much about the consequence of their actions. And I know, like, I feel a lot of pressure from society when I'm out in public that there must be a consequence for my children if they behave in a way that isn't acceptable socially. But actually what we like to challenge that with is a limit instead of a consequence. So you've heard me say the words limits and boundaries a lot tonight instead of consequences, because consequences absolutely are the norm. But if we challenge that instead and we think about limits, it helps again to deepen our relationship, to improve behaviour, to improve attitudes. So for example, these aren't amazing to read on here, but when I send you the PDF, you will be able to zoom in. When we think about the consequence as stop throwing that, or I'm taking it away, that tells the child what you don't want them to do, again, like we talked about earlier, but it doesn't give them that guidance. Whereas if we can still set the limit, that toy is not for throwing, I won't let you throw that. That lets them know that it's the object that's the problem, not them, or not them trying to throw it. And actually you've set the limit around what action is. And then like we talked about earlier, when we use the example of like running and things like that, you can then extend it to say, let's go outside and throw this ball instead. So that gives them very clear instructions. It lets them know that they absolutely can throw if that's what they need and if that's what they need to do right now. You've given them an instruction of how to do it safely, where to do it. And again, it encourages that problem solving. You've still allowed that exploration and that expression from them because they like throwing or they like the feedback that gives them. However, you're not sort of letting them do that in an inappropriate way or whatever it is. And that's why we use the phrase walking feet inside a lot, isn't it? So we want them to run, we want them to get their wiggles out, but there's ways that they can do that and there's ways that they can't. So yeah, there's lots of things on there that talk about how that's helpful. So for example, if we have a consequence for a child that is purely focused on trying to teach them a lesson, it teaches sort of power over mentality. So I am bigger than you and I will tell you what to do, and that's not okay. Whereas if we think about a limit, it helps to reinforce and to role model boundaries and limits for our children so that they can understand their self-control and how their body works and how their body moves. Oh, we're going to be finishing nice and early. That's good. I like it. I always like to add time on for questions and stuff, but when we don't need it, it just means everyone can go to bed earlier. Accountability is really, really important. And I usually keep this slide in a lot of our training, like our leadership training and our management training and things like that. Accountability obviously refers to a person's commitment to their tasks and their acknowledgement of their specific role. So it's really important from a staff and a parental point of view to commit to trying this. And like I said, it's a lot of work. It's work for you as a parent, but long term, it makes it so much more enjoyable. You guys will come through problems much more connected. You know, your relationship is stronger, it's nicer, the communication that you have with your child is much more effective, and you know, your children are going to trust you a lot more, they're going to respect you a lot more. And from a staff point of view, you're going to be able to hold yourself and your staff team accountable. Yourself and your spouse need to hold each other accountable if there's two of you in the household. My husband struggles with me, I think, because I've got a degree in early years and I do this at work as well. That must be really tricky for him. So I have to be trying really gentle with him because that's really, really difficult. But yeah, that accountability is really important. And obviously we're always here for follow-up. So like I said, I'm going to send you the PDF of this tonight. We are recording it, so within the next couple of weeks that will go live as well. And we're always here. The staff that work with your children are really, really skilled at these kind of things, and they'll know where to get information. Like I said, they can give you the policy, they'll have more information for you. There's further reading going to be available for you tonight and all that kind of thing. So it can really help you. And then, like I said earlier, it's really, really important to be realistic, not perfect. We don't expect any of you to go away from this and be able to emotion coach effectively overnight or even in a week. It's something that you will have to keep coming back to yourself and going, how could I have handled that differently? How could I have done that differently? And actually, what's really helpful is that you can do that with your child. It doesn't just need to be something that you do behind closed doors. Get used to apologizing to them and talking about it, and saying, you know, I didn't handle that very well. I'm going to work through a way to do that differently next time. You know, I didn't like the way I spoke to you then. Next time, I'm going to try this way. And then our children understand that there isn't perfect. There's no such thing as perfect. There's just trying and practicing and keep trying. And I talk about that a lot with my children, about we're always practicing. No matter how old we are, we're always practicing. We're always still trying. You know, you are naturally, as an adult, going to become dysregulated sometimes. You're not going to emotion coach effectively, but just keep seeing that opportunity that it is to connect, to apologize, to move forward and think about what you can do next time, to take that time to calm down and regulate so that your children can observe this. They can't always see us dealing with things perfectly because that's not how life looks. But that honest conversation is a really nice opportunity to think about it, and to reconnect and have that discussion. And again, that helps them to be better problem solvers because they will be more likely to do that as well. If you get into a regular cycle of doing this, you are then making better links for your own brain and your own opportunities to deal with those things. You've got to slow down and to do those things, which I think is really, really nice. And like I said, from a parenting point of view, I feel like it's really effective. And from a staff point of view at nursery, it's very, very effective. Every time I walk into one of our nurseries, it's always the first thing I notice, how respectful the kids are, how amazing it is. We all of our Ofsted reports always have that sentence that's written in one way or another. It always says children's behaviour is exemplary. And I'm like, yes, it is. You know, and I know you guys may not see that at home all the time, but because of the consistency of the staff at nursery, it is, their behaviour is phenomenal. The way they deal with their emotions is phenomenal. You'll probably see a lot of posts on social media because the staff share it with me all the time. They've got their emotion stones, their emotion cards, and they're always going through that with children and working through it. Again, like we said, you've got to build it into your daily thing rather than just doing it when they are dysregulated and when they're struggling. And they do a wonderful job, which is absolutely fab. Your children are all a huge testament to you because they behave incredibly. And then if we think about the further reading, I said about Hayley Fuller, I think her tag is Parenting Works on Instagram and online. She posts a lot on LinkedIn as well, which is really helpful. Kathy Brodie is another really fab professional that we like to use at Little Hands, and I'm constantly emailing out to everybody. They're like, great, here she is again. But she puts on free webinars every week, and she keeps it live for a week. You can either join her subscription to get everything for free, or to get everything included, or you can watch, each video is live for 7 days, then it's free for the first 7 days. And she has some really great topics on there, and usually the videos aren't too long either, so you can check the email to see what it's about, and if you're interested you can watch that, which is really helpful. Like I said, anything to do with John Gottman is really helpful. He's got a couple of books about raising emotionally intelligent children, which I've read, and those are really nice. Conkbayir, which is a fabulous name. She is another professional who's really, really championing co-regulation in early years, championing emotion coaching and regulation and thinking about that for children. She has got multiple books as well, which are really, really helpful. And she also has a lot of trauma perspectives and early childhood trauma that she can bring to the fold, which is really supportive and really helpful. So that's really good. NDNA, which is the National Day Nurseries Association, but if you were to search for NDNA, that would come up anyway. They have a great parent zone, and they have lots and lots of really helpful things around behaviour, around regulation and emotion coaching and that kind of thing, that can give you sort of more real life examples and opportunities. I know they send through lots of stuff for staff as well that I always forward on to staff, and that's always really, really helpful. But yes, that is it from me. Has anyone got anything, any like specific examples that they wanted to ask questions about, or anything that you thought I was going to talk about that I didn't talk about tonight? Oh, thanks, Mia. Mia's always really kind to me. Mia's put in the chat, one of our staff at Amblecote. This is really, really useful, not only as a practitioner at Little Hands, but as a parent too. She's honestly, she knows how to win me over. I'll pay you tomorrow. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, Lauren, thank you. But yeah, is anyone got any comments? Anything? Do you feel like, yeah, whatever, she's saying it, but it's not going to work in real life? Yeah, very real. Yeah, when I'm at home with my kids, I'm always like, this is going to be good ammo for at work. This is going to be a good example for at work. But yeah, like I said, we're always here. I have sent you some emails, so you've probably got my email address, but if not, I'll include my email address when I send you out the PDF of this. So if you ever want to email and chat, please let me know. And I'm sure that we'll be doing more sessions like this in the future because they were very highly requested as well. But I'll let you all enjoy your evening. Thank you very much for coming, guys, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye. I'm reading them. Thank you, everybody. Yes, you can stop the recording. That would be wonderful. Thank you, Loz. Have you got any comments on when a child gets frustrated and bites and